as an overall exam technique, right? If you see an exam that's got all these different questions, you have a go at the first one, and you're like, okay, this is taking me forever, or I'm a bit confused about it. Don't get bogged down. Like, an exam is quite a long thing, and if you spend loads of time on something early, you might get it out, but then you won't have enough time later. In fact, that's very relevant to the topic that we're looking at today. So that's kind of like, you know how you guys get reading time, right? You get 5 minutes reading time at the beginning? This is what this is for. It's for identifying, okay, which ones am I going to start with first? I'd encourage you to start with the questions that you know you can do, like, and you're pretty confident about them. That'll let your brain sort of warm up, and then you can tackle some of the harder ones. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to kick off with question 2, all right? So we begin, let's get down the important details. So there's a rate there, $15.63 per hour. That's important. That's good. She'll get 35 hours at that rate, and then, new color, she gets 2 different rates for the different kinds of overtime, right? And I deliberately did it a little bit different from what you usually get. Usually it's time and a half, and then double, right? That's common. But there's no reason it has to be like that every single time. You'll often get different things depending on the job. So you'll notice her first kind of overtime is double. And then her second lot, if she goes in further than that, is double time and a half. Okay? So that means, for instance, here, if she worked an hour, that's going to count, her pay is going to count as if she worked 2 hours, right? 2 times. And for this, if she worked an hour, every hour she works after that, it's going to be 2.5. Okay, so I'm going to put them down, those important bits of information for me. Okay, so find her pay now for a 48-hour week. So I'm going to say pay equals, okay? The first 35 hours are at that normal rate, yeah? So I'm going to say here's $15.63. And I'm going to multiply that through my first bit, just the regular rate. 35 hours worth. Okay. But then there's some number of hours where she'll get double, right? How many hours? 4 hours, right? So the next 4 hours, right? That's if she worked 39 hours, she'll get them at double time. Okay? So I've got 35 hours here, now I've got 39 hours. How many are left over that I haven't accounted for? 9 more hours, right? So that 9 hours is at 2.5 times, right? So I'm going to go 2.5 times those last 9 hours, okay? And once I've set that up, the rest of that is just number crunching. Has someone already got a number for me? 1,023.77 cents. Fantastic. There you go. Was there any rounding involved, or that was? Yeah. So you had to round up or down, I guess, depending on what you got there. I guess you rounded up. Yeah. So there you go. All you have to do is set that up properly based on reading the question. Okay. So that's fine. Now let's pedal back a little bit and come back to question 1. So the reason why this is a bit trickier is because you can see they give you some information. So there's an annual salary, right? They say, well, I said, there's a bonus here. But then they do this classic mathematics general thing of now comparing that. Like, don't just give me the answer. Compare that to something else, right? What if the bonus had been changed? Okay. Now, this is extra tricky because you can't simply just deal with the question as is. You can't go directly from 8% bonus to 4% bonus, okay? What we want to work out is, well, what if you had no bonus? Like, the question doesn't tell you to do that. You kind of have to work that out first, right? So, question 1. I'm going to say $62121.60, and there's a clue that tells you in the question, there's a phrase that tells you that has the 8% already in it. What's the language that tells you that? Very good. You've got to, like a single word changes the wording, that changes the meaning of it entirely, right? So since that includes the 8%, right, what this really is 108% of what he actually earns. Does that make sense? 108%. 100 is the original, and then it's got the other 8%. So I want to divide by 108%. Okay? Do you remember before, if I gave you a base salary, like so, suppose it was, I mean it's not, but suppose it was 50,000, I say, okay, tell me the bonus now. I said you can multiply that by 108%. I'm trying to go in the other direction, so that's why I divide instead of multiplying. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, so what this is going to give me is, I was a bit naughty, I really should have said, what am I calculating now? What's this going to give me? Yeah, it's the normal salary, or I'm using the phrase base salary, right? It's like what he earns, not just with a 4% bonus, but with no bonus at all. Okay, so I should have called this the base salary.
Is it then with your base salary, you find out what he would receive with the 4%, so then you times the
Yeah, very good. Okay, so let's get a number, shall we? Can I find out what is the actual base salary?
It starts with 5.
5.
5715.
5752 flat. No sounds? Yeah. Okay, so that's his base salary. That does, I have the working, but that sounds about right. Okay, someone can convert that for me. Okay, so this is the base salary. So I'm going to now say salary with the 4% bonus. Okay, so I'm now going to go back to that 57 whatever. And that's what I'm going to add a 4% bonus onto. Okay? And of course that will give you a new number, which is... Do we get over the 60 threshold? Or we're still in the 50s? Okay, so I just want to point out some common errors that come up with a question like this. And this is exactly why I worded it in this way. Frequently people will see 8% and they'll see that number and they'll just go 8% of that, right? 8% of whatever is already there. But do you see why we're not doing that, right? The 8% isn't additional to that. The 8% is already in there. That's why 108% is what's going to tell me how to work with this and how to get to the base salary. Okay? So the base salary is going to be, you divide through that. And then there's a secondary step. You've then got to add the 4%. Okay? Right, so there were some traps and pitfalls there. I hope that made sense after explaining. Yes?
So
Yeah? Okay. Please ask me questions after if you want to clarify. I have all my working as well. So let's have a look at question 3 and then we'll move into today's content. Edward works in a factory. He's got a $19.20 per hour rate. Now again, this is tricky because again there's a comparison. Do you notice that? There's a will he earn more? Oops, sorry. And then there are 2 options, right? There are 4 10-hour days or 5 8-hour days. Okay? Now, has someone already got an answer to this already? A few people? Which one's better?
5 8-hour
Yeah, the 5 8-hour days are, okay? Now I just want to pause for a minute before we get our calculators out, before we write anything down, right? Before you calculate, you should always think first. Think first and use your intuition to guide what you're doing, okay? Tell me, not a trick question, for each of these different options, right? Which one has him working for longer? Which one has him working for longer? And the answer is neither. Do you see they are the same number of hours, right? Like 4 by 10 is 40, and 5 by 8 is also 40. Does that make sense? Okay. So now what that tells you is, when we look at his hourly rate actually doesn't matter, right? Because in both cases, you're earning the same per hour. Does that make sense? And you're working the same number of hours. So when you calculate that part, you'll end up with the same wage. Okay, does that make sense? Same number of hours, same wage. But there is something that's different, right? The part that's different is it's the allowance, right? Now the allowance is on what basis? How often do you get that? It's a per day thing, right? So being that the more days you work, the more of an allowance you'll get. Which does that tell you will be the better option, just without doing any numbers yet?
5 days.
Clearly more days will be better, because he'll get an extra $11.70, an extra day's worth of allowance. Does that make sense? Now that's not enough to get an answer. We do need to work it out just briefly. But at least now you know, okay, at least I'm expecting an answer. And when I get to the end, is it what I expected or not? Will I be able to spot a silly mistake? Okay? So logic will help you. Let's do the working out now. Okay? So I'm going to do 4 10-hour days. What's his pay going to be? Well, again, you've already told me it's 40 hours times, what was the rate again? $19.20. And then I add on, what do I add on to that? The allowance is this 1170 number, and I multiply it by 4, the number of days. So I'm going to say plus 4 times that. Okay. Now, because of the conversation I just had with you, I'm actually very disinterested in this number. You should work it out. You'll get something there and you put it in. What I'm interested in is the comparison, right? So now when I work out 5 8-hour days, 5 8-hour days, I'm still going to have the same 40 times $19.20 at the start. Do you agree with that? Like 5 times 8, we established that. So that's why you can see mathematically, these parts just equate, right? And so when I compare them, well, they're equivalent, it's this other thing which really makes the difference. And we just discussed, you get an extra day's worth of the imbalance. Does that make sense? So whatever your two numbers are, here and here, I'm expecting, if you have a look carefully at your calculations, they should be exactly $11.70 different. Does that make sense? Do you get that? Can you confirm that in your calculator? So that's how you conclude that option B is the better choice.